Think about the last time you explained yourself, not when someone asked, when you volunteered the explanation before they could question you, the decision you justified before anyone challenged it, the choice you defended before anyone doubted it, the action you explained before anyone asked why. Let that sit for a moment. That explanation was not for them, it was for you. It was your fear speaking before anyone else could. It was your internal doubt asking for external reassurance. And every time you give it, you confirm to yourself and to everyone watching that you do not fully trust your own judgment. That is the pattern this audiobook exists to break. The truth is, silent confidence is not something you are born with. It is something you build, decision by decision, silence by silence. And the first decision is to stop explaining yourself to people who never asked. This is not about becoming cold, arrogant, or dismissive. It is about becoming so grounded in who you are that the need to explain dissolves. Not because you stopped caring what people think, because you started trusting what you know. The person who does not rush to justify their choices is not hiding anything. They are showing you exactly how sure they are. Silence is not empty. It is full. And it speaks more powerfully than any explanation you have ever given. Chapter 1. The Explaining Habit, What It Is, and Why We Do It. I sat in a boardroom in my mid-30s and watched a man justify a decision for 11 straight minutes. Nobody had questioned him. Nobody had challenged the plan. He had simply made a statement, and then, unable to endure the 2 seconds of silence that followed his own sentence, he began to explain. Reasons stacked on reasons, context layered on context, and the more he spoke, the smaller he looked. I recognized him immediately, because I was him. I had walked into that room with the same reflex wired into me. The only difference was that he had not yet seen it, and I had just started to. So let us name the thing before we do anything else. Over-explaining is providing justification for a choice, a decision, or an action before anyone has questioned it, or continuing to justify after a simple answer would have been enough. It feels like consideration. It feels like thoughtfulness. It feels like good communication. That is the trap. Beneath the surface of most unprompted explanations sits something far more revealing. The fear of being misunderstood, the need for approval, the anxious anticipation of judgment that has not even arrived yet. You do not explain because explanation is always necessary. You explain because some part of you doubts that your decision can stand on its own. That doubt is the real subject of every chapter that follows, and the habit of explaining is its most visible daily expression. Here is what I have learnt about where this begins. In 1967, the developmental psychologist David Elkind gave a name to something teenagers feel constantly: the imaginary audience, the sense that everyone is watching you, evaluating you, waiting to catch you in a mistake. Elkind showed that this heightened awareness of being observed is a normal stage of development. But here is the uncomfortable part. For many of us, that stage never fully ends. It just grows quieter and moves into adulthood. The boss becomes the audience. The friend group becomes the audience. The in-laws become the audience. And the explaining habit is the never-ending performance you give to an audience that mostly is not even looking. The root of the habit is self-doubt. The impulse to explain rises most powerfully in people who have not yet made peace with their own judgment. When you genuinely trust a decision, the need to defend it shrinks because external validation is no longer required to make it feel secure. People who are settled do not audition, they simply move. There is also a social driver here that is worth being honest about. Much of the habit of explaining is an attempt to manage other people before they have a chance to react. You explain to preempt criticism. You explain to control how a decision will be perceived. You explain to soften the relationship consequences of a choice before those consequences arrive. This is approval seeking in its most everyday form. It is not dramatic, it is not pathological, it is ordinary, and that is exactly why it is so dangerous. It runs in the background of your life, quietly charging rent on your authority, and this is where most people stop. They see the pattern, feel embarrassed by it, and conclude that they are simply a people pleaser who will always be that way. That conclusion is a lie. The pattern is invisible to you precisely because it is so habitual. Seeing it is the first and most necessary step. And seeing it does not require a spiritual awakening. It requires deliberate observation. So here is your practice for this week. Pay attention to every moment you explain yourself, not when someone asks for an explanation, when you offer one before being asked. At the end of each day, write down 3 situations where this happened. Then note what you were feeling in the moment before the explanation arrived. Was it anxiety? The anticipation of judgment? The desire to be understood? The pattern behind those moments tells you more than the explanations ever will. Do this without turning it into self-criticism. The habit of explaining is not a character flaw. It is a learned pattern that once served a purpose. Maybe it kept you safe as a child. Maybe it smoothed over a difficult home. Understanding it without judgment is what makes replacing it possible. Judgment locks the pattern in place. Curiosity unlocks it. Identify 3 specific situations in your life where you most consistently over-explain. These are your highest priority practice contexts for everything that follows. The places where the habit is strongest are the places where practicing silence will produce the most significant change. Lao Tzu wrote that he who knows others is wise, but he who knows himself is enlightened. The explaining habit is, at its core, a failure to fully know and trust yourself. The enlightenment he describes, genuine self-knowledge, is what makes the explaining habit obsolete. You do not need an audience when you have a compass. Chapter 2: How Every Explanation Weakens Your Power. There was a sales cycle in my 2nd year as a director that I have never forgotten. 2 of my people were pitching the same client. The first walked in and spent 20 minutes justifying every slide before the client had said a word. She explained the methodology, the timeline, and why the numbers looked the way they did. She was thorough, articulate, and completely invisible. The second person walked in, made her case in 8 minutes, and then stopped talking. The client leaned forward. The silence did not last long, but it did the work. The second person closed the deal. When I asked the client later why, she said something I have carried with me ever since. She said, with simple words, the first one kept apologizing for the report, and the second one clearly believed in it. Power is communicated not only through what you say, but through what you do not say. People who explain their decisions without being asked are signaling, whether they know it or not, that they are not entirely certain their decisions will be accepted. And people receive that signal even when they are not conscious of doing so. The quiet person in the room, who acts without over-justifying, is almost always perceived as more grounded, more confident, and more trustworthy than the person who fills every silence with explanation. The psychologist Albert Mehrabian demonstrated something in his work on communication that changed how I listen to people. In 1971, he showed that, when it comes to feelings and attitudes, more than 90% of what a listener receives comes from tone of voice and facial expression, and only a small fraction from the actual words. Think about what that means for a moment. Your explanations, your carefully chosen words, are the least persuasive part of what you communicate. The delivery is the message, and nothing changes the delivery like the certainty behind it. Here is what an unprompted explanation actually does. In behavioral terms, it asks for approval. You place the other person in the position of judge by offering your decision for their assessment before they requested it. You hand them the gavel. Every justification you volunteer is you saying, "Please tell me this was okay." And people feel the weight of that request, even when they cannot name it. Real security communicates differently. People who are genuinely settled in their decisions do not need confirmation that the decisions were right. That security is what silence transmits. The absence of explanation says, "I have considered this, and I stand behind it." No further justification is required. It is not arrogance. It is simply a statement that your decision has already survived your own scrutiny, and that was the only test that mattered. I learnt this the hard way, leaking influence in meetings for years before I saw it. I believed my explanations made me look thorough and considerate. The truth is, in most rooms, chronic over-explaining produces the opposite perception. It reads as someone who needs external validation to feel settled in their own choices. It reads as instability, dressed up as diligence. And this is where most people stop. They hear this and they think they have to choose between explaining and being rude. That is a false choice. Not explaining yourself is not the same as dismissing others. It is a decision to let your actions represent your choices, rather than asking your words to justify them in advance. There is a world of difference between refusing to explain and refusing to engage, so here is your practice. Before offering any explanation this week, pause and ask one question. Did anyone request this explanation, or am I offering it to manage my own discomfort? If the honest answer is the second option, withhold it. Then watch what actually happens in its absence. Most of what you fear simply will not arrive. There is an old saying that silence is the best response to a fool. The more useful version is this: silence is often the best response to the internal fool who fears that your choices need external justification to be valid. That fool is not your advisor, it is your noise. Choose one situation this week in which you would normally over-explain and deliberately withhold the explanation. Write down what happened without it. Did the feared judgment materialize? Did the relationship suffer? In most cases, what you discover is that the explanation you thought was protecting you from a consequence that was never coming. You were paying for insurance on a house that was not on fire. Chapter 3. How Society and Culture Made You an Explainer. Think about the first time you were made to answer for yourself. Not as an adult, as a child. The dinner table question that was not a question. Why did you do that? Say something. Explain yourself. In many homes, an unexplained choice was treated as suspicious. A quiet child was a child with something to hide. And so you learnt very early that your decisions were not fully yours until they had been approved by someone else. That lesson did not arrive in a single moment. It was installed across thousands of small moments until it stopped feeling like a lesson and started feeling like gravity. The habit of explaining did not develop in isolation. It was shaped by an environment that rewarded justification and penalized unjustified choice. Families that required children to account for every decision, schools that demanded visible reasoning over quiet action, social structures that treat unexplained choices as suspect. All of them teach the same message: your choices do not count until someone else signs off on them. In the 1970s, the researcher Geert Hofstede analyzed surveys from tens of thousands of IBM employees across more than 40 countries, and he found something that has shaped how researchers understand social behavior ever since. Cultures differ dramatically in how much they demand that individuals justify themselves to the group. In some cultures, an unexplained personal choice is considered normal. In others, it is considered disrespectful. Think about what that means. The compulsion you feel to explain yourself may have very little to do with you at all. It may be the accent of the culture you were raised in. You did not choose to speak that accent. You absorbed it before you could choose anything. The environments most formative for the explaining habit are almost always early ones, where approval was conditional, Where love and acceptance depended on justification and compliance, the explaining reflex is installed more deeply than any adult experience can replicate. This is not a modern idea. Attachment researchers have documented for decades how children adapt to the emotional conditions of their homes. If explaining kept you safe, you learned to explain. If silence was punished, you learned to be loud about your reasons. You built a survival strategy, and then you carried it into rooms where you were never in danger at all. Culture doubles down on the family lesson. Many cultures treat unexplained choices as socially inappropriate. The norm of explaining yourself to family, community, and social group is programming that was never consciously adopted, which means it can be consciously examined, and where it does not serve you, consciously released. Then came the machine that scaled it. Social media took a habit that once operated in private relationships and handed it a public audience. Now the impulse to justify your choices plays out in front of hundreds or thousands of people at once. Every decision becomes a post. Every post becomes a defense. The cultural explaining habit at unprecedented scale, with the audience never sleeping. The truth is, recognizing that you were conditioned rather than born this way is one of the most liberating realizations you will ever have. You did not choose to be an explainer. You were trained to be one. And what training installed, awareness can begin to uninstall. Nothing about your biography is a life sentence. Conditioning does not have the power of destiny. It only has the power of habit, and habits can be rebuilt. So here is your practice. Write down 3 expectations from family, culture, or your social environment that you consistently fulfill through explanation and justification, but that you would not freely choose to meet if the social cost of not meeting them disappeared. Next to each one, ask the honest question: whose expectation is this, really? Mine or someone else's? This is not an invitation to reject every social expectation. It is an invitation to separate the expectations that genuinely align with your values from the ones you serve only because the old programming is still running. Distinguish between genuine social responsibility, where explaining is a legitimate relational obligation, and conditioned compliance, where you explain not because it is owed, but because the cost of silence feels too high to accept. The first is worth honoring. The second is worth examining. And do not let this recognition curdle into resentment toward the people who installed it. Most of the conditioning was not designed to limit you. It was passed down by people who were themselves conditioned. Understanding its origin frees you to make different choices. Blame just chains you to the same story. The greatest freedom is to live without the approval of others, not freedom from relationship, freedom from the compulsion to justify yourself in order to feel entitled to your own choices. That freedom is available to you starting today. Nobody has to grant it. You simply stop asking. Chapter 4. Know yourself. Trust yourself. The deepest root of the explaining habit is not what other people will think. It is the uncertainty about what you think. You can feel the difference in your own body. When a decision aligns with something true in you, you do not feel the pull to defend it. You feel quiet. When a decision wobbles, the mouth opens. The explanation is the sound of inner instability, looking for support beams from the outside. In 1955, the psychologists Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham created a simple model that still appears in management training all over the world. They called it the Johari window. The basic idea is that every person has 4 regions: what you know about yourself, what others know about you, what neither of you sees, and what only you know. Here is the part that matters. The explaining habit lives in the gap between the first region and the last. The less clearly you know yourself, the more feedback you demand from others to figure out who you are. Other people become your mirror, and you become dependent on the mirror for your reflection. The foundation of silent confidence is not the absence of explanation, It is the presence of self-knowledge deep enough that explanation becomes optional rather than compulsive. You cannot stop explaining yourself by deciding not to explain. That is forcing the symptom. You stop explaining yourself by becoming someone whose inner ground is stable enough that the explaining impulse loses its urgency. The impulse does not get suppressed, it gets outgrown. So what does that inner ground actually look like? It is built from values. Clearly defined personal values function as a decision-making reference point that operates independently of external opinion. When a decision aligns with your values, you know it without needing anyone to confirm it. When it does not, no explanation makes it feel right. Consult your own disappointment for proof. You have made choices that were socially approved and still felt hollow. That hollow feeling was your values, sending a signal you did not yet have a language for. Most people have a general sense of their values, but have never written them down, never tested them against their actual behavior, never refined them through deliberate reflection. This vagueness is a major contributor to the habit of explaining. An unclear internal compass requires external input to navigate. When you do not know your own coordinates, you ask everyone else where you are. Boundaries are the second pillar and a direct expression of self-knowledge. What you will and will not engage with, stated through behavior rather than explanation. Think about what a boundary actually communicates. It says, here is what I am, and here is what I am not. It requires no justification, because it is not an opinion. It is a fact about you. People respect boundaries they can see clearly. They exhaust the boundaries they can negotiate. And your explanations are the negotiation. The third pillar is honesty about the progressive nature of all this. Self-knowledge is not a destination you reach once. It is a practice developed through ongoing reflection. The more consistently you examine your own responses, your values, your motivations, the more stable the inner ground becomes, and the less urgently external validation is needed. Stability is not an event. It is a repetition. So here is your practice, and I want you to do it today, not this weekend. Write your 5 core values, not the ones you think you should have, the ones that actually governed your best decisions, the moments you are proudest of. For each one, assess whether your current daily behavior actually reflects it. The gap between stated values and lived behavior is where explaining most frequently compensates for internal dissonance. You explain to cover the distance between what you claim and what you do. Closing that gap reduces the impulse to explain more than any social skill ever could. When you face a decision that normally triggers the explaining impulse, return to your written values and ask one question. Does this decision align with my values? If yes, no explanation to others is required. If no, the explanation you feel compelled to give is the sound of your own uncertainty, not a social requirement. Confucius said that to know what you know and what you do not know, that is true knowledge. Applied here, knowing what your values are and what they ask of you in any situation is the specific knowledge that makes silent confidence possible. And do not build your sense of self on external markers, accomplishments, roles, relationships, other people's opinions. These change. A self built on them requires constant explanation to maintain because it is always subject to external revision. A self built on genuine values requires no maintenance through approval. It simply stands. Let the action be the statement. Practice acting from your values without explaining them. The people who matter will understand. The people who do not were going to. Chapter 5. Prove yourself through actions, not words. I want you to notice something the next time you describe what you can do. The words feel good in the moment. There is a small pleasure in sounding capable. And then the conversation ends, and nothing has changed, and you are exactly where you were before, except that you have now promised something. Words are cheap. actions are not. The person who explains their capability at length is communicating the same thing as the person who says nothing and then demonstrates it. But the demonstration produces a fundamentally different impact. It provides evidence. Evidence requires no further justification. Assertion always does. In 2007, a man stood on a stage in San Francisco and did something that changed the technology industry forever. He did not begin with focus groups. He did not justify his design decisions to critics who had spent months predicting failure. He did not explain why Apple had abandoned the keyboard, why the phone had no removable battery, why existing market conventions were discarded. He simply held up the first iPhone and let it work. Within minutes, every question the skeptics had was answered by the evidence before them. The product did not ask for approval. It presented a result. That man, Steve Jobs, understood something that most of us resist for our entire lives. The work is the argument. Compare that to the pattern most of us run. We announce our plans, we explain our intentions, we list our qualifications, and every word we spend describing what we will do is a word stolen from doing it. Benjamin Franklin put it simply, "Well done is better than well said." He wrote that in the 18th century, and it has not needed updating since. Here is the mechanism underneath it. When you explain what you can do, you place the listener in the position of choosing to believe you. Belief is required as an intermediate step, and belief can be withheld. When you demonstrate what you can do, you place the evidence before them, and no belief is required. One asks for trust before earning it. The other earns it and then receives it. Notice the difference in how people respond to you when you stop asking them to believe and start showing them. The room grows quiet. The objections disappear. Nobody argues with a result. There is a word for the gap between what people say they will do and what they actually do. Behavioral researchers call it the intention-action gap, and it is one of the most documented patterns in psychology. People overestimate their future action and underestimate their future friction. Here is the uncomfortable consequence. The more you explain what you intend to do, the more closely others and you notice whether the action matches the explanation. Over-explaining converts your credibility into a liability because it raises the standard against which you will be measured. The truth is, a result communicates everything an explanation attempts to communicate, and more, without requiring a single additional word. The person who produces a result has already answered every question the explanation was trying to anticipate. The promotion you are explaining is not the same as the promotion you are earning. The business you are describing is not the same as the business you are building. The body you are planning is not the same as the body you are training. This is where most people stop. They substitute the description for the thing. They talk about the mountain as if walking around it in conversation counted as climbing it. I learnt this the hard way in my corporate years, watching the loudest roadmaps die and the quiet builders get promoted. Every time you choose action over explanation in a situation where both are available, you cast a vote for an identity that builds credibility through behavior. And that identity compounds. The track record of demonstrated results over time is the most persuasive argument available, and the one that requires no effort to maintain. Nobody can argue with what you have already done. They can only see it. So here is your practice. When you catch yourself preparing an explanation for something you have not yet done, ask one question. What is the smallest action I could take right now that would make this explanation unnecessary? Then take that action, not later, now. One call, one page, one rep, one conversation. The demonstration does not have to be monumental. It has to be real. And do not use this principle as an excuse to withdraw from genuine communication. The goal is not to become someone who refuses to speak. It is to shift the balance toward demonstrated reliability over asserted intention, and to stop using words to compensate for the gap between what you say you will do and what you actually do. Let the work speak before you do. And when your words arrive, they will be supported by a track record that makes explanation unnecessary. People will not believe you because you asked. They will believe you because they have seen it. Chapter 6. Learn to say no without explanation. There is a sentence I want you to hear cold, because it will reorganize something in you. No, followed immediately by because, is not a boundary. It is a negotiation invitation. The moment you add a reason to your refusal, you have implicitly offered the other person the opportunity to respond to your reason, to challenge it, to present a counter-argument for why your reason is not sufficient. You have converted your decision into a debate. A simple no converts the decision into a fact. Facts are not debated, they are observed. Every economist learns the same first lesson, and most of us never learn it at all: opportunity cost. The idea, formalized across centuries of economic thought, that every choice costs you every alternative you did not choose. When you say yes to one thing, you are saying no to everything else that your time, your energy, and your attention could have gone to. Here is the part nobody teaches. The reverse is also true. When you say no cleanly to one thing, you are saying a quiet yes to everything that matters more. Your no is not a rejection of the world, it is a protection of your life. The discomfort of saying no without explanation is almost always guilt. The feeling that a bare refusal is unkind, selfish, socially inappropriate. I understand that feeling. I spent my 20s and early 30s hoarding it. I said yes to every request, and then I explained my way through the consequences, and I burnt out at 35 because I had never learned that a childlike sentence was available to me. No. The conditioning that makes you treat no as a transgression can be examined and released. Look at what you actually sacrifice when you explain a refusal. You spend the energy of formulating the justification. You spend the energy of managing the other person's response to it. You spend the energy of the extended conversation that the explanation invites, because an explanation is always an invitation. A clean no returns all of that energy to you immediately. It is not just a refusal, it is a withdrawal of your attention from a negotiation you never agreed to enter. And here is the paradox that most people never see. A clear, unexplained no often conveys more genuine respect than an over-explained refusal. Think about it. When you refuse without justification, you are treating the other person as someone who can accept a clear response without needing you to manage their reaction. You are assuming their emotional maturity. The over-explained refusal, by contrast, assumes they will fall apart without a reason to hold on to. Which message is more respectful? The one that treats them as capable, or the one that treats them as fragile? I have sat across from both kinds of people in negotiations, and I can tell you which one I respected. The person who said, "This does not work for me," and then stopped talking, had more authority in the room than anyone else in it. Not because they were cold, because they were complete. Their decision had no loose ends for me to pull. Here is your practice. It is a 30-day one. Say no without explanation at least once per week, in a situation that would normally trigger a detailed justification. Start with lower stakes situations to build the skill. A dinner invitation, an extra meeting, a favor that would quietly drain you. Use simple, warm, complete refusals. I am not available for this. This does not work for me. I am going to pass. These statements are complete, clear, and they do not invite the negotiation that explanations routinely produce. Then stop. Do not fill the silence. Let the no do its work. Do not apologize for saying no. An apology signals that saying no is a transgression requiring forgiveness. It is not. It is a decision about your resources that you are fully entitled to make. without asking permission or forgiveness for exercising it. The old saying is that half the troubles of this life can be traced to saying yes too quickly and not saying no soon enough. You cannot get the trouble back, but you can stop manufacturing new troubles starting today. After each practice, notice what actually happened in the absence of the explanation. In most cases, the feared consequences do not materialize. The person does not collapse. The relationship does not fracture. What materializes is something you were not expecting: a small rise in your own temperature, a quiet sense that you are allowed to have a life. That feeling is what a boundary feels like from the inside. It is not guilt. It is the sound of your own authority returning to you. Let it in. Chapter 7. Keep your plans secret. Work in silence. You have felt it. The rush of telling someone your plan and watching their eyes light up with recognition. The encouragement feels like progress. It feels like the thing has already begun, and that feeling is exactly the problem. There is a specific psychological cost to announcing your goals before you have achieved them. In 2009, the psychologist Peter Gulwitzer published research that should concern everyone who has ever shared a big intention. When people announce an identity-level goal, a goal that says something about who they are, and they receive acknowledgement for it, they actually work less toward it afterward. The social acknowledgement serves as a partial substitute for the satisfaction of achieving the goal before the work has been done. The brain tastes the reward without paying for it, and the motivation that would have driven the action is partially spent, dissipated in the social performance of intending to act. This is where most people stop. They announce the goal, receive encouragement, and, somewhere in the following weeks, the work quietly dies. And they never connect the two events, because the connection becomes visible only when someone points it out. The announcement was not the beginning of the journey. For many people, it was the end. Let me be precise about the mechanisms, because you will feel each one in your own life this year. First, the social acknowledgement trap. When you share a goal and receive encouragement, validation, or interest in response, the social reward is real, neurologically similar to the reward of actual achievement. This partial satisfaction reduces the urgency that drives consistent action. You feel like you are on the way, so you do not run. Second, the planning-doing gap. People who talk extensively about their plans are frequently the same people who are less productive executing them. Not because talking causes failure, but because the energy invested in performing the plan is not available for the unglamorous work of execution. Every sentence you spend describing the future is a sentence you are not spending living in it. Third, the protection of silence. Keeping plans private protects them from the opinions, doubts, and unsolicited advice of others during the most vulnerable phase of development, the period before the work has produced results. An untested idea is easily disrupted by external skepticism. A half-built building invites commentary. A finished building invites admiration. Silence is not hiding. Silence is scaffolding. Warren Buffett understood this better than almost anyone alive. For decades, the most consequential financial moves he has made were known to the world only after they were completed. In an era when financial pundits narrate their every consideration in public, Buffett protected his execution phase from the interference that public announcement would invite. By the time anyone knew what he had done, the decision was already made, the position already taken, and the window for external influence already closed. The result spoke. The planning never did. Here is the cleanest version of the principle. Share your accomplishments. Share your results. Share what you have already done. The completed version of a goal is the most powerful form of communication about it. Arriving with a result produces admiration rather than skepticism, evidence rather than debate. People cannot argue with what is already finished. And do not confuse this silence about plans with secrecy as a personality trait. You are not becoming closed or guarded in general. You are choosing strategically when to share, after the work has been done, rather than before. There is a saying that the world is won by those who let it talk. While others discuss what they intend to build, the silent builder is already building it. When the result arrives, it is a more compelling statement than any announcement could have been. So here is your practice. Identify one goal you have been discussing that you have not yet begun or completed. Stop discussing it today, not tomorrow. Today, commit to 30 days of silent execution before mentioning it to anyone else. Direct all the energy currently flowing into describing the plan into executing it. At the end of 30 days, you will have one of two things: a result to share or a lesson from the attempt. Both are infinitely more valuable than the conversation about intention you have been having. The world does not need to hear your plans. The world needs to see what you built. Let the result be the announcement. Chapter 8. Embrace the power of silence. Let me tell you about the most misunderstood form of strength. It does not raise its voice. It does not fill the room with sound. It sits in the pause and watches the noise exhaust itself. It is silence, and I have spent years learning to trust it, mostly through the painful arithmetic of saying too much too fast and watching real authority slip away while I talked. Silence is consistently misread in social environments. The person who does not fill every pause, who does not explain every decision, who does not justify every choice, is frequently assumed to be unconfident, disengaged, awkward. I assumed that myself for years, but in almost every case of genuinely confident and powerful people, the opposite relationship holds. The more genuinely grounded a person is, the less urgency they feel to fill silence with sound. Silence, in the presence of someone who has genuinely made peace with themselves, is not absence. It is presence. It communicates that the speaker does not need the conversation to validate who they are. That quality, the ability to be present without needing the room to confirm your existence, is the essence of everything this audiobook has been pointing toward. The warrior philosopher Miyamoto Musashi finished his Book of Five Rings in 1645, and within its pages he made an observation that has survived 4 centuries because it is true. He wrote that in any contest, the one who observes most and reacts least holds the advantage. Musashi understood that silence is not empty space, it is intelligence gathering. When you are quiet, you can see what the talkers cannot: the patterns, the hesitations, the true intentions underneath the performance. Here is what silence actually does in a room, mechanically. When you speak least, you are frequently perceived as most thoughtful. The pause before speaking communicates that the words being selected are worth selecting, that they are chosen rather than reflexive. This perception is not an accident of style. It is an accurate reading of a person who is genuinely present, rather than anxiously performing, and the pause can be practiced. Deliberately pausing for 5 seconds before responding in any significant conversation produces 2 consistent benefits. The response is better than it would have been without the pause, because it has been chosen rather than reflexively produced, and you are perceived as more confident, regardless of the response. The pause itself is a communication. It says, I am not at the mercy of this conversation, I am in it. Most people are forming their response while the other person is still speaking. They are not listening, they are waiting for their turn. Genuine listening, the full reception of what is being communicated before formulating a response, requires the silence of suspended judgment. This silence produces better understanding and, therefore, better responses than the anxious parallel processing most people engage in. You have felt the difference on both ends. The person who truly listens is unforgettable. The act of listening is exhausting. And there is a deeper truth about restraint. one that took me years to understand. People who say less than they know, who withhold more than they reveal, who speak with precision rather than volume, are consistently experienced as more interesting, more trustworthy, and more powerful than those who offer everything immediately. Restraint creates a space into which others project significance. Mystery is not manipulation. It is the natural signature of someone who knows they are not required to perform. So here is your practice, starting today. In one conversation, deliberately pause for 5 full seconds after the other person finishes speaking before you respond. Notice what happens in those 5 seconds. Notice how the quality of what you say afterward compares to what you would have said without the pause. Then practice this in every significant conversation for 7 days. When you feel the urge to rush towards silence and fill it with anxious explanations, stop and let the silence resolve on its own. Uncomfortable silence almost always resolves without your intervention. Allowing it to resolve naturally communicates a comfort with the present moment that is immediately perceived as confidence. And be careful here, because there are 2 kinds of silence, and they look exactly alike from the outside. Strategic silence is about strength. It is the calm of someone who has nothing to prove. Weaponized silence is about control. It is a pointed withholding designed to communicate displeasure. The distinction matters, and it is almost always immediately perceived by others. One earns trust, the other spends it. Francis Bacon wrote that silence is the sleep that nourishes wisdom. Every conversation you do not fill with unnecessary sound is one where wisdom has space to arrive. Every explanation you withhold is an opportunity for your actions to speak instead. Sit in the pause. That is where your voice lives. Chapter 9. Be at peace with yourself.
Every practice in this audiobook, withholding explanations, saying no without justification, keeping plans private, embracing silence, is significantly easier to sustain when the internal state it stands on is genuine rather than performed. That internal state is peace with yourself, not happiness, not the absence of difficulty, not perfect self-esteem. Something quieter and more durable, the ongoing experience of being settled in who you are, your values, your history, your choices, your direction, in a way that does not require constant external confirmation. Here is a distinction that took me years to learn, and I learned it the hard way. Indifference and peace are not the same thing. Dismissing others' opinions through indifference is a defense mechanism. It is the appearance of not caring, worn like armor, often because the truth underneath is that you care very much and cannot afford to show it. Peace is different. Peace is not that others' opinions fail to register. It is that they no longer have the power to destabilize a self that is already settled. One is armor, the other is ground. Armor exhausts you because you must keep wearing it. Ground holds you because you are standing on it. Why does this matter here? Because the habit of explaining is loudest in the areas where self-acceptance is thinnest, the places where you are not yet at peace with what you are. Your limitations, your history, your ongoing imperfection are the places where you perform the hardest for the world. You explain the job you are ashamed of. You justify the decision you have not forgiven. You defend the body, the choice, the past, to an audience that never asked. The performance is not for them. It is for the part of you that has not yet said, "This is mine, and it is okay." The daily practice that builds this peace is embarrassingly simple, which is why almost nobody does it. 5 minutes of genuine stillness before the day's demands begin. No device, no task, no agenda. Simply sitting with yourself and noticing whatever arises without immediately trying to resolve it. This is not meditation in the formal sense. It is a daily appointment with your own inner experience, maintained with the same consistency you would bring to any other important commitment. And the science supports what every tradition has claimed. In 2014, an analysis of 47 separate trials published in JAMA Internal Medicine found moderate evidence that mindfulness programs measurably reduced anxiety and depression in the people who practiced them. The effect was neither dramatic nor instant, it was cumulative. That is precisely the point. Daily stillness, maintained consistently over weeks and months, produces a gradual but genuine shift in how stable your internal ground feels. And as that stability increases, the need for external validation that drove the explaining habit decreases proportionally. The practices in the earlier chapters become progressively easier, not because you try harder, but because you need less. Buddha said that peace comes from within, not from seeking it without. Every explanation you have given to others in search of peace was looking for something in the wrong place. The peace that makes explanation unnecessary is internal, not external. It cannot be given to you by anyone's approval. It can only be built through your relationship with yourself. So here is your practice. Make the 5-minute daily stillness practice non-negotiable for the next 30 days. Not because you will feel dramatically different after each session, but because the cumulative effect of 30 consistent practices produces a measurable shift in how settled you feel, and therefore in how much you need external explanation to feel secure. And do not wait until you feel peaceful to begin. Practice is what produces peace. It is not the precondition for it. You begin from wherever you currently are, and the practice gradually changes where you are. Begin today. 5 minutes of genuine stillness before any other morning activity. No phone, no content, no conversation. Simply sit. At the end of 5 minutes, write one sentence about what you noticed. Do this for 7 consecutive days. At the end of 7 days, assess whether the quality of your inner ground feels any different from day 1. This is the chapter I most needed when I was 35 and running on approval. The rebuild did not start with a better explanation of myself. It started with 5 quiet minutes in the morning, sitting with a man I had been avoiding. Let your own company become the place you return to. The quieter that ground gets, the less the world owns you.
Chapter 10. Your Roadmap for Living with Silent Confidence. Every chapter in this audiobook maps a single journey. You started with a pattern you could not see, the explaining habit. Buried under the feeling of politeness, you learned what it costs. You learned where it came from. You learned the foundation that makes it unnecessary. Self-knowledge, action over words, the clean no, the private plan, the deliberate silence, and the inner peace that holds all of it up. Now comes the part that separates the people who listen from the people who change. The journey is not completed by listening to an audiobook. It is completed by the daily practice of returning when you over-explain and notice it halfway through the sentence, returning when you say yes, only to regret it before the conversation ends, returning when you announce a plan and watch the momentum leak out of it. The return is the practice, not the perfect execution of silent confidence every time. The consistent return to it every time you drift. The people who transform are not the people who never fall back into the pattern. They are the people who catch themselves a little earlier each time. The Emperor of Rome kept the most revealing journal in history. Marcus Aurelius ruled the largest empire of his age, and in his private book, The Meditations, written for no audience at all, he questioned himself, corrected his own thinking, and reminded himself of principles he was committed to, but struggling to live fully. What is most striking about that record is not its wisdom, it is its humility. The most publicly powerful person in the Roman world did not write for a reader, he wrote for himself. His confidence did not come from others' confirmation of his worth. It came from an ongoing private practice of self-examination and return to his own values. The explaining he did not need to do publicly was made unnecessary by the honest practice he maintained privately. Let me now give you the roadmap simply, because it must be small enough to survive an ordinary life. In the morning, 5 minutes. Stillness before any external input. Ask one question. What do I know to be true about myself and my direction today that requires no external confirmation? Let that answer be your orientation for the day. It is a compass, not a to-do list. Throughout the day, keep your diary. Each time you notice the impulse to explain, write it down. What was the situation? What drove the impulse? What did you choose to do instead? This record is not for self-criticism. It is for pattern recognition. It makes visible what habit keeps invisible. In the evening, 2 minutes. Note one situation from today where you chose silence or action over explanation. One, however small. The accumulation of these notes across weeks becomes evidence of a genuine identity shift. You will not feel it daily. You will see it in the pages. Weekly, review. Where is the explaining habit still most active? That is your practice focus for the following week. Where has it most visibly reduced? That is proof the practice is working. Proof does not need to be dramatic to be real. The truth is, you already have everything this life requires. You do not need a new personality. You do not need to become someone who was never you. You need to stop performing the version of yourself that was built to survive other people's judgment, and let the quieter, steadier version take the lead. Silent confidence is not a wall you build around yourself. It is the ground you discover underneath all the explaining, present all along, waiting to be trusted. Your practice begins tonight. Write one situation from today where you explained yourself, and one where you wish you had stayed silent. That is your first diary entry, not tomorrow, tonight. The roadmap is short, and it starts in the same place every day, with a few minutes of stillness and a decision not to perform. So let me say plainly what this audiobook has been telling you in 1,000 different ways. The need to explain yourself is not a sign of thoroughness. It is a sign that your own judgment is still waiting for permission. Every unprompted explanation is a quiet request for approval, and the people receiving that request have heard it far more clearly than you think. Your authority is not built in your words. It is built in your silences, your actions, your boundaries, and your refusal to audition for rooms that were never holding auditions. The person who does not need to justify themselves is not cold. They are complete. And completeness, not noise, is what the world actually respects. Here is your roadmap, and it starts today. This morning, 5 minutes of stillness before any screen with one question. What do I know to be true that needs no confirmation? All day, catch one explaining impulse and hold it back. Say one no without a reason. Tell no one about one plan and work on it. Tonight, write one line about the moment you chose silence and one about the moment you wish you had. That is it. That is the whole architecture. Small enough to survive a bad day, strong enough to rebuild a life. I want you to hear this clearly because it is the message underneath every chapter. You were never broken. You were trained, and what was trained into you can be trained out. You do not have to earn the right to be quiet. You do not have to justify your existence to anyone. The doubt you feel when you stop explaining is not a warning. It is the withdrawal symptom of approval addiction, and like all withdrawals, it passes. What remains is something you have had all along, your own voice telling you what you already know. You are worthy of the space you occupy. You are capable of the quiet. You do not need to perform for the people who love you, and you certainly do not need to perform for the people who do not. The confidence you have been chasing in other people's reactions was never theirs to give you. It was always yours to stop needing. If this audiobook landed somewhere in you, do 3 things. Share it with one person who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. And comment below with your answer to one question. What habit will you start today? Not what you want to start. What you will start tonight, before you sleep. I read the comments and want to know which chapter hit you hardest and what action you are taking because of it. One last thing. Ram Dass wrote that the quieter you become, the more you can hear. When you stop filling the silence with explanation, you begin to hear something more valuable than any approval. Your own voice, uncompromised, telling you what you already knew all along, that you were enough before the first word, and you will be enough after the last. Silence is not empty. It is full, and it has been speaking for you all along. Now let it.